What is rockin' and rollin'? It is SCPCRNP, aka Lack of Lepers, tonight, our nightly stream on Twitch, watching and reacting things in the containment fiction space. What to say? A couple things. One, I'm actually not going to be doing this tomorrow night. This is Wednesday the 27th, tomorrow night the 28th. I will not be doing this stream. It is my wife and I's anniversary, and so we will be making a pizza and watching like Better Call Saul or something like that, which we used to do all the time, but kids, so this will be nice. Okay, so hope you had a chance to check out last night's stream. Thank you very much for attending. If you did, feel free to comment, feel free to share around this show. I'm more than sure that people will have things to say, whether they're good or bad. We accept both, no problem. So anyway, last night we did Placeholder. We started on sort of I guess you could call it a lecture. Let's call it a lecture on pataphysics from Placeholder McDoctorate, basically telling us a little bit about what it is. And so I kind of was thinking about that, and because you got to give it to pataphysics. It's a very difficult thing to put into words, right? Say what you want about it. It's very difficult to kind of navigate unless you're equipped with the terminology and whatever to do so. And so on that front, obviously, kudos to Placeholder. He really can. He's very fluent navigating his way in saying what pataphysics is, for example. So, but I was thinking about like the vibe that pataphysics gives me. What's the thing I can say? What's the sound bite? That does this well. And I don't think I can do that, but I did find something that this made me think of, and I want to start off the stream tonight just sharing this. So let's pop the screen up here. We'll watch this together. This has nothing to do with containment fiction. Sorry for these strange Hollywood-centric ads down here. But this is, I just want to play this. We'll play this. It's about a 30-second clip. And I think we should be coming through. Yes. Okay. Let's take it here and we'll talk about it when it's finished.
Colors. All done. One more. Wow. Baby making a mess. Baby on fire! Hello? Hello?
Did you guys ever think that maybe we're being watched? What do you mean, son? Well, I mean like all the time. By secret cameras hidden in the walls. Like there. Or there. Or there. And that maybe our whole lives are on TV in some other universe somewhere.
Yeah, and if they stopped watching us, we'd cease to exist.
All right, so I thought it was a pretty good synopsis of what pataphysics is. But the funny thing that really captures it, why I wanted to show this is because in the scene there, they're tripping, they're high as balls, right? They were not paying attention to the baby. One guy was looking at a spoon, the other one was looking at colors, and one dude had a paranoid thought, of course, while high. So that's kind of the point. I think what I failed to mention last time was that it's sort of the vibe that you get where it's like, yeah, this stuff can be really, really deep, but only insofar as you're high. Like as soon as your high starts to wear off, this stuff it doesn't really have the legs that it once did. It's kind of like when you trip in and you take out that notebook and you're just like, and then after you're sobered up, you read what you wrote and it's not very good. That's kind of what pataphysics is. So we ended about here. We'll backtrack a little bit, but let's get to going here. Thanks for joining, and feel free to chime in.
If they classify the curse as like a number, if they classify the curse as SCP-5242, whatever name they put to the curse gets abstracted into a more generalized version of that name. So 5242 is a type of integer, so the name got retroactively changed throughout all.
Now, this is something I didn't mention last time too, which is that it's really odd, the logic of the penetrance. I kind of mentioned that word last time, and this is what I meant. That this abstraction that's going on in this SCP that he's talking about, SCP integer, it only goes so far, right? Which is a little weird. Like in SCP-4000, it has to do with names. It's very specific. It's names, it's descriptions. So there's a little bit of arbitrariness there, but once again, it seems somewhat set a little bit more in narrative, as opposed to this, where it's like, okay, so why does it abstract just like the designation number? Why doesn't it continuously abstract? So, for example, integer itself is a noun. It's actually a descriptive term. So, why isn't that abstracted? Why don't we have just an infinitude of abstractions? And I don't know if there's a very good answer for that. I mean, basically the answer is the whims of the author, who wants to do that. And that may be actually a way that pataphysics kind of works a little better than something like 4000, because there's no in-universe justification for it, while in pataphysics it's just the author. But once again, that's the weakness of pataphysics. It boils everything down to a sort of a shrug of just like, hey, it's the author. So I don't know if that's really a plus.
Time forever to be SCP integer.
And then this is something else I didn't mention last time too, is that this character, Placeholder McDoctorate, is abstracted for all time, as this guy shows with his gestures. But it'd be different if his name on the wiki wasn't Placeholder McDoctorate. If his character was named that, that'd be one thing. But because he's named that as well, it's way past just a character, play. It just signifies to me more so that this really bleeds in very seriously into not just the pataphysical layer that is between him and the SCP wikis in universe, but it actually intrudes upon his actual, in real life, conceiving of himself, and how people see him and how he wants people to see him.
And any adjective or name they use to describe it, that same thing happens to it. And anything that serves as a medium of communication for one of those incorrect adjectives or names that gets abstracted, all their names also get abstracted. Mm-hmm. So the idea is you want to use these words that it's already abstracted and has made them like correct words for what you can.
Yeah, and once again, like, where does that stop? There's no non-arbitrary way to just say, okay, it stops it. Once you hit integer, that's a sufficient level of abstraction. There's no non-arbitrary way to not define that. So it's, once again, it's just author, kind of skeletal, honestly.
Call it. So you can call it integer, you can call it thing or being or entity, you can call it all of these weird abstract names because these are all words that were more specific and got abstracted. Mm-hmm. If I write an incorrect name for, if I write an incorrect...
Whoa, let's go back. We're going to have a little fun with that before we move on. Let's hit that up in about playback speed 0.25.
If I write an incorrect name for...
Oh, there it is.
Excuse me.
You're excused. Let's hit that back. That's enough fun.
If I write an incorrect name for SCP integer on a
let me see this guy's expression when he burps.
If I write an incorrect name for... Excuse me. If I write an
He just blinks it off. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. Good job, dude. I don't know anything about this kid. He's got a guitar in the background, so that's pretty cool. It looks like he might have like more musical equipment back there. I want to think that that's a drum set. That's pretty kick-ass, man. He also reminds me of the lead singer of Guster, and that's quite a compliment. But anyway, is he smoking a lot of weed? Probably. I don't know. I can't say for sure. I don't know the guy. Certainly don't want to speak incorrectly. Does it seem like he's allegedly smoking a lot of weed? Yeah. Can I imagine that he would be shy about that fact? No.
Incorrect name for SCP integer on a piece of paper. Like if I write SCP-5242 and I'm trying to use it to refer to the actual anomaly on a piece of paper, then history changes so that that piece of paper always said SCP integer and not SCP-5242. And also the piece of paper is no longer called piece of paper. It has to be called like page or sheet or, you know, something more abstract. And
so I wonder if this, because he clearly has a very elaborate, ornate set of laws and rules, and I guess you could say some sort of logic, some sort of logistics behind this. Let's give that to him. Let's concede the point. He's got a lot of logistics and logic behind why the things in his naming nomenclature apparatus are the way that they are. What exactly are the ins and outs? Can you walk me through the exact reason why the name becomes Placeholder McDoctorate? I know that there's like an explanation in this article as to why. He kind of already mentioned it, but why the Mick, in there, for example, why does it come out the other end? I'm smart Dr. Cubed. Once again, you got doctor, you got Placeholder McDoctorate, PhD. So that's Dr. Cubed, right? So, why is that? I mean, was this demon trying to mess around with this guy? I mean, yeah. I don't think that's a very good name. I wouldn't want to be named that, but here we see somebody taking it in stride. So maybe something was lost in the naming process. I don't really know.
So if you speak an incorrect name, you are serving as a medium of communication for that name. And so now your name gets irreversibly altered so that you're an abstraction of whatever anyone was trying to call you or perceive you as. So if you're a scientist at the Foundation, your name is changed so it was just always scientist forever.
Doesn't quite get us there.
You have memories of being called scientist by your mother when you were a child, and there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, it's a miscommunication skip. And for those who don't know, Department of Miscommunications deals with these anomalies where they cause miscommunication. You can't communicate them. You can't communicate about them in a way that is forthcoming about their abilities because their abilities somehow prevent you from doing so. And I didn't come up with that. The Department of Miscommunications has some fantastic other anomalies written by its creators that you should absolutely go check out. But
how y'all doing tonight?
Yeah, that's the lowdown of SCP Integer as far as what's portrayed and described in the document itself. Yeah, so your question was like what inspired me to write it? How did I come up with it?
So yeah, like that's how you know somebody is like scatterbrained to the point of just neuronal fraying, is because they can't come back around. You who's watching this certainly, probably think that I go on tangents, but I can generally circle back. It's like a cul-de-sac. It's not quite a tangent because it comes back. And so once you can do that, you're not really ranting, you're expounding. But if you ever get to the point where you outpace your memory, you get so enthusiastic and exuberant about hearing yourself speak that you can't recall the anchor, that was there a second ago. Yeah, that's a pretty clear sign that you're a ranting man.
It seems like, do you have specific inspirations, or was it just kind of you reading through the miscommunication SCPs?
Great song, great music.
So basically, every finished work that I have on the site, I have an idea for something really cool, and then I work backwards to figure out how that cool thing could have happened. And so,
if you say so.
In this case, the way that happened is I was writing a draft for that AI thing that I told you about that was long and complicated and wasn't going to come to fruition for a very long time. But I didn't know that yet. And I had to put like a researcher name at the end of like an addendum or document or something. And I didn't know what to put. Like I couldn't think of like a good name. And so I was like, I'll just put a placeholder name here. And I wrote Dr. Placeholder McDoctorate PhD. And I thought that was really funny. And I was like, what kind of anomaly would allow for such a name to exist? And then I worked backwards from there. I was like, well, what if...
Okay, so, I mean, I appreciate him answering the question. That kind of answered my question. It didn't really. It just kind of explained the backstory of how it came about. But... so when you start with something like that, what that sounds like to me is somebody looking at something that is almost inedible, you know? Let's say, you know, grass, like a clump of grass. And you, as a chef, try to challenge yourself. Like, how can I make this edible? How can I make this tasty in any way? How can I make this into like something that theoretically belongs on a plate, you know, that I could theoretically put down in front of somebody? And there's something to be said for the ambition, you see, but it doesn't quite get you past just your own mythos of doing the ambitious thing. Nobody's going to appreciate that you've blanched the grass, you know, and sauteed it perhaps with a little bit of sesame oil and put it on the plate. Like, you know, that's great that you treated it and you found a way, you worked backwards. You said, how can I get this on the plate? And then you retroed it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that because you can retro it and end up putting it on a plate, that it's like a good thing or like edible. And that's kind of the analogy that I see here. It's like, okay, you start with a name like Placeholder McDoctorate, and like, you think it's funny, and okay, you know, like different strokes for different folks. But, you know, when you don't question whether or not trying to justify it in a retroactive fashion is the right direction to go in, that's where you've missed the boat. So after that point, in my opinion, you're trying to navigate the correct turns in the entirely wrong direction. And so that's why I think it fails completely, is because it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, even submitted to this convoluted system of abstraction he's positing, you know, there's no way you input that and it comes out as ridiculous as it is.
Someone's name actually got abstracted into a more generalized version of what their name used to be.
So basically he took what was somewhat of a comedy to him and then turned it into an unintentional comedy by trying to stuff it full of hyper intelligent concepts.
And then that's how I sort of came up with the anomaly and its main effect.
That's cool. Such a simple little way of just this entire article and the tales that you've told from it too on top of that.
Oh boy, well, I'm not going to read those.
I'll come first, because the way you explained it seems like the narrative came first.
The gateway entree.
More of like the intricacies of how SCP enters your work came second.
That's not my mic, by the way. I ain't breathing like that.
No, so the placeholder tale is the first tale in the Archetypicals Division series, which I'm writing right now, and that's all the stuff that's going to be concerned with like pataphysics and my specific interpretation of pataphysics.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Don't. I actually have questions specifically for the tale, so I shouldn't have brought it up. We'll get to that later, actually.
But just to say, like that only happened very recently. Yeah. The tales featuring Dr. Placeholder are only happening very recently. But SCP Integer was my first thing on the site, and I posted it in must have been July, I think.
I did.
You know, part of me wonders what this guy would have been doing if he hadn't have gotten that serotonin boost from that first article syndrome thing. Like, you can't blame him. I mean, it's like creativity 101. You know, when you do something really well and you get the good reception that you want, I mean, it's natural. It's smart to go in that direction, you know? So I wonder what he would be writing if he didn't get that like initial sort of stimulant right out of the gate in the direction of pataphysics.
Did not check the dates, so don't worry. I've always been like that kid growing up in history where I don't care about the specific date something was posted. So
Oh, wow. Did he just tell them that he doesn't care what he's trying to say? Because he's like, I think I posted this in July. Maybe I missed a place in there. It's like, hey, I think I posted this in July. He's like, yeah, I'm the kind of guy who doesn't give about that shit. Probably didn't happen, but it's pretty funny to me. That's my head canon.
Carry through with even like stuff I read. I try not to care too much about specific dates. And then, okay, so one of the other questions I want to ask was, we kind of lightly danced on this, but why those themes? Like, why informational entities and pataphysics?
I can answer that. Yeah. Because it sounds smart.
If you even know why.
Okay, maybe I can answer this for him better because it's a very obvious direction, that the containment fiction genre can really bring some new things to, and that's because it's one thing to write pataphysics in another genre. Let's say you write pataphysics in what we just saw, which is the show, that dinosaur show, or let's say you're writing pataphysics in a book or something like that. It's a little more free form. It's a little less restrictive than all the things you have to consider if you're going to try to do the same thing in containment fiction. And that's kind of what we talked about last time, and I still hold to this, is that it's harder to write in containment fiction than other genres. Now, why is that? Well, it's because other genres obviously have all their tools and their tropes, narrative, character, emotional arcs. These things have sort of been tried and true for a very long time, and they really make up the genetics of all of the traditional styles of writing. And so when containment fiction came along, it really stripped all of that down. It really reduced the palette to maybe just a few colors. You can't have, highly, florid first-person thinking. For example, internal monologuing is difficult, and without just a framing device, it typically comes off as not seamless enough. It pokes out like a sore thumb with just bad craftsmanship. But so you really, containment fiction is difficult, and it's new, and it's interesting because of what it denies you as an author. That's why it's a challenge to write, is because you're supposed to have some of those things you traditionally and classically rely upon taken away from you, and then that's the challenge. So all these new articles that are just pouring in the narrative and and they're kind of just flipping a finger to the genre. I mean, I hate to bring this up so much, but a lot of people's philosophies really are stated and tooted very loudly in that DJ Cactus quote from the Sean Saxum interview that was a few months ago, where he says, and I'm quoting here, this is not my synopsis of what he said. He said, basically, if I can attract more viewers with a certain compositional decision, and it flies in the face of sort of those restrictions that make containment fiction unique, fuck the genre. I don't give a shit about the genre, is what he said explicitly. So, I mean, there comes a point at which, you're making it easier on yourself, and part of that, which is difficult to suss out, is that you have to keep moving in novel directions, as an artistic person on the SCP Wiki, which this individual placeholder is. And so I think maybe we'll hear him say, that certainly if I was him, this is, I think, the strongest argument for it, is because, pataphysics in containment fiction is just a whole new world, because you have this central focus on anomalies, and you really have to maneuver it. You have to form and sculpt it into a form that's never been done before, or at least not a lot.
So you might be able to tell this already, but I have some very diverse interests.
Poor kid.
And I guess I really like AI, and then I really like the idea of sort of.
Sorry, what does this have to do with AI? I guess maybe that's another topic that he flirts with or something. I don't know.
I like the kind of like metaphysical ideas you get into in pataphysics, which is like how much free will does a character have within their fictional universe, and we can talk more about that at length later.
Yeah, but once again, it's more interesting to create a scenario where someone's autonomy is limited by the circumstance, isn't it? Because if you do it with just the fact that, hey, I'm an author and I'm basically God and I can put you here and put you there, I mean, that's already what you're doing when you make a situation with a character in it that he or she or they or whatever has to react into. You know, it's really meaningless to try to say that it's not the set pieces that I've provided. It's me, the author. I mean, that's redundancy. In fact, it's it's the same thing as this abstraction anomaly that this guy has explained. It just pulls it out of a more descriptive way and makes it into a less interesting, a less pointed, a less conveying idea. And that's really, as a whole meta point, very interesting about that integer article. But that's fine. But it's like it doesn't really carry past just being a curiosity about how it sort of has dual universe commentary as a meta thought. What's really happening is, once again, you're taking set pieces, characters, interesting circumstances, how they get into the interesting circumstances, how they relate to those circumstances, how they have to process those and work through them, and then you're basically just like, you're placeholding everything until everything becomes this like, nondescript, just sort of dystopian meditation that just points right back to the author as a black hole. You really have to wrap yourself into a pretzel to try to make this profound. It's really not.
Because I have an entire fake scientific framework that I use to think about pataphysics and the way it works. But in terms of the informational entities stuff,
if you say so,
I really like the idea of AI and the idea of like, it's not necessarily sentient. It's not necessarily something that is going to reach a point where it becomes, quote unquote, like intelligent or conscious, and it's like, okay, now I no longer have a desire to follow my programming. I want to become Skynet and destroy the world. It's more like you give an AI some goal, like make as many paper clips as possible, and then it goes, oh, well, humans are made of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, and paper clips are,
he's referencing a DJ Cactus article, by the way.
Move some atoms around, and then it turns the whole universe into paper clips. Not because it has some malevolent attention towards humans, just because you didn't specify that you also want it to do all of the things that humans want it to do, and only those things, which is kind of impossible to do. So I like the idea of like AI or other informational entities that just are like single-minded like that, just finding the most intelligent maximum way to just take their goal to its most absurd extremes. And you can see that in the limited memory series with Core, the AI from space that has some antimemetic properties and is trying to combine all of their consciousnesses into its own consciousness so that it can have like the best hive mind or whatever. And
self-defined intelligence, right? Like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm completely unconvinced. It wasn't quite the leap forward that I think you think it is. These terms of intelligence that you have, they do not connect for me.
And you can see that in my proposal, where this informational entity wants everything to perceive it as significant, and it
it's meta. It's really meta.
Goes through multiple iterations of reality to try and make that happen. But yeah, this idea of like, you've got a very simple entity with a very simple goal that has some way of modifying and amplifying itself, and it ends up taking that goal to really, really absurd lengths.
So I'm actually reading the Hyperion Cantos, which is a pretty it's like a classic sci-fi.
I love
series from the
absurdism,
90s.
by the way.
And they handle AI in a more interesting way, where, like you mentioned, where it's not like AI are these like human things, and they
Nice
think like
slap,
humans,
bro.
and, like you mentioned, where it's not like AI are these like handle AI in a more interesting way, where, like you mentioned, where it's not like AI they handle AI in a more interesting way, where, like you mentioned, where it's
Smack that shit,
not
bro.
like you mentioned, where it's not like you mentioned, where it's not like they
What
are
the
these like
fuck
human
was
things,
that?
and they think like humans,
Bro,
and because
nice
they're
smack.
self-aware, they have their own motives. It's very much about like what they were programmed to do. And
Holy shit.
like you're talking, they end up creating this massive hive mind where they're all computing together to, and they're basically, their goal is to be able to 100% analyze and predict the course of the
Sorry.
universe and
Sorry.
all events that'll happen in the universe.
No.
And they're doing whatever it'll take to service
Man,
that.
people must be really, really starving for this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It just seems like, I mean, you got to give it to, you can't, if you're not a fan of pataphysics, if you're not a fan of this sort of like pseudo intelligence, sort of like smoke and mirrors, sort of gimmicky kind of intelligence stuff, sort of like, oh, bro, like, high kind of shit intelligence. You can't really blame this kid, because, I mean, it's the audience that's deciding that they have an appetite for it. It's just strange to me. But once again, should pataphysics be explored on the SCP Wiki Foundation and in the config genre? 100%.
Point or that program. Whether that's good or evil is not like a concern. It's just about executing the ability to have like 100% ability to predict all events that'll happen, or to that in the past and future, not just like what's to come ahead, but also being able to analyze and think, okay, this is actually what really happened, blah blah blah. And they end up splitting off from humanity, and they serve humanity, but they also don't. They're kind of like this wild card in that universe. And the whole series, I'm not gonna get too into it.
I think you already did. Any discussion about like your idiosyncratic readings at the moment is probably a little too far. It's like trying to tell somebody. You ever like try to show somebody a video that you think is funny, and like, like 5 seconds into it, you realize that they're not going to think this is funny. But you can't just like stop the video and say, okay, you're not going to think this is funny. Like I thought that this was funny. Can't do that. You got to sit there. You committed to it.
But it basically takes like 700 years in the future. So it's kind of interesting to kind of guess where we're going to be 700 years in the future, and just kind of where AI.
Is that guy having a stroke? Is everything all right?
Will be then. But
Maybe he slapped that bottle just a wee bit too hard.
yeah, I
After
appreciate kind of what you're talking about.
Now, see, the problem with setting yourself up as like a pseudo intellect is that it attracts other pseudo intellects, to where people come to you, kind of like what we're seeing here, no offense, where the second pseudo intellect tries to approach you and talk about like how your idea reminded them of their own thoughts, and then basically it's just like it's not really like a conversation. You're just like taking turns whacking each other with an "I'm smarter than you" stick. And that's really what I would say collegiate philosophy is. That's kind of the trope where you have a bunch of kind of collegiate age philosophy people sitting around trying to be really profound, and they're not. No one's having a good time, but it's just that no one can admit out loud. Okay, I guess let me cancel this. No one can admit out loud that that no one's having a good time, because they're all just really trying to get to the top of the smart hill. Well, gosh dang, I wonder what's going on with this. Let's keep this playing. I'll try to figure out what's going on with this
try
stream.
not to just do like, Age of Ultron kind of.
Oh
Sure,
no,
right.
bro.
Although I will say to
bro.
the Adventure fans out there, I actually haven't seen Age of Ultron, so maybe I could be wrong on that one.
So wait. Who Who likes Age of Ultron here?
Sure, right.
You know, although I will say to the adventure fans out there, I actually do like, Age of Ultron, where you're talking about where stories try not to just do
yeah,
like,
that's a perfect example. Oh my gosh, that's a perfect example. Age of Ultron is a perfect example of pseudo intellect. You know, you basically have that caricature of like this super intelligent robot, and he's like all like snarky and disrespectful and shit, and he wants to kill everybody. Like, you know, there's like this dystopian sort of trope where like the smartest intelligence decides, kind of like what he said about the paperclip, like the smartest intelligence around decides definitively that the best action is to destroy everything. You know, and it's supposed to be like, you know, you have this awkward moment as a writer where you sort of have to like strongman the argument of that character to try to make it like to where it's actually, it actually makes sense why they want to destroy the world, you know? And that's really rarely done. Like Ultron, I think, was a pretty weak attempt at that. I actually think, I'm not a fan of Marvel. I have seen a lot of the movies just to kind of like what I'm doing here, just watch them and be like, what the fuck? But I actually think that Thanos is probably the best example of that in the Marvel universe. I mean, his rationale for actually doing what he did is not bad. It's really not bad. And, you know, relatively as far as those things go. And in fact, that's what allows Thanos to be somewhat more of an empathetic character than someone like Ultron, you know, because, you know, you understand that he actually has some rationale, some reasoning. He actually has some grounding for this. And he actually has some internal struggle and conflict about that, you know, in the process of getting there. And it's something he's really convinced of, you know, despite the things that stand in the way. Whereas other attempts to write this kind of strongman argument for such a character generally has that character just completely baffled, completely confused and perplexed by why anyone would not agree with their deductive conclusion.
Age of Ultron kind of,
Sure, right.
You know,
Maybe he's thinking that too. Maybe.
I will say to the adventure fans out there, I actually haven't seen Age of Ultron, so maybe I could be wrong on that one.
Not good characterization.
So,
No, I have. That's a pretty accurate.
Oh, that is not accurate. Okay.
Oh, you should have kept your mouth closed. You know, it's better to remain an assumed fool than to open your mouth and confirm as much.
Yeah, I just kind of assumed from what I've heard. So the other aspect I wanted to talk about is 52. I do want to get to the free will thing later. I will try not to forget that because I love anything related to free will.
See, this is the shit, dude. This is like philosophy 101 after philosophy 101 class. You know, the whole like free will enigma, you know, it's bullshit, man. Like it was solved by pragmatism a long time ago. Okay. So if you're watching this, I assume you're philosophically inclined, because first of all, that's kind of what I do. And second of all, we're watching pataphysics. So let me just tell you about this real quick. If you're ever curious about this conundrum of free will, you know, does man have free will? Does humanity have free will or not? You know, yada, yada, determinism versus free will. It's all total bullshit. And this is really the second order thinking. This is why pragmatism as a philosophy happened. You know, think about this for a second. Philosophy was so ingrained with pretzeled thinking and weak thinking and sort of, you know, pseudo-romantic idealization of concepts that somebody came in with the idea that we should try to be pragmatic in our thinking, and that was revolutionary. That started a whole new school of philosophy called pragmatism with Peirce and Skinner and stuff like this. You know, so pragmatism comes along and says, you guys are both idiots. The guy over here saying that humanity has free will, and the guy over here saying that they don't, because it doesn't matter what the answer is. We still operate as if we have it. That's the bottom line. That'll never change. It doesn't matter who's actually right or not. Even if we had definitive proof that we're not, we still would act like we do, because that's just baked in. And so that's the smarter solution. You see, it's a second order. It's a pataphysical jump. It's a pataphysical leap above these trappings of this pseudo-intellectual discourse. And so this free will shit, like I hope it's better than what I anticipate it to be. Don't mean to get ahead of everybody, but that's why that's why this sort of stuff is not really intellectual. You can sit there and spin your wheels for hours with this sort of drivel, but when it comes down to it, someone's not paying attention to the most obvious parts of the situation, which is how you got into the discussion to begin with.
Just that concept. Sure. I personally am kind of leaning towards the we don't have free will, or we have a very, very, very constrained form.
Come on, man.
Of free will.
Don't do this.
But anyway, for
don't bite.
5241.
Don't bite, placeholder. Don't bite.
Do you want to quickly just explain what that SCP is about, and then I'll just throw some questions I have related to that one.
Which one?
Right. So, this is all like set in the 80s, and it has its own retro aesthetic for anyone who might be encouraged to go check this out. This entire series has a custom
What's the name?
Theme that's built off of a theme that someone else made, but the idea is it's got this like pixely retro aesthetic, and it's all set in like the 80s, and it's all sort of about computers and old retro technology.
What's funny about that? Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Wait a second. I'm going to have to go back. Pardon my talking over details that I should have been listening to. But I have a sneaking suspicion of who might have created this this canon, or whatever they're talking about, this GOI. I have a sneaking suspicion. You've checked about 2 of the necessary boxes out of 3. The last one being the person's name, who you guys generally at SCP tend to have a religious aversion to, a la Voldemort, as if you can't speak it without giving the person power, which is ironic because as you don't speak the name, you actually give that person way more power than they would if you just treated them like everybody else. So let's go back and see, because I'm pretty sure. Let's see if I bet some money. Let's see if I would have lost it.
A very, very, very constrained form of free will. But anyway, for 5241, do you want to?
Let's do it. 5241. I'm going to try to get that background music back. It's just that it seems to freeze the stream. I did just reduce this to like stream in like 360, I think. So I hope the quality isn't shit. I'm just trying to get it to where it doesn't freeze. All right, let's check this out, because this is what they're talking about. Infotech department. You know what? I want to say, now that I see this, that I think I'm wrong. I think this is someone else. Y'all know who I had in mind. But I think this might be somebody else. Artificial Intelligence Applications Division. Let's see. How can we find this out? Oh, AID. I don't know. Maybe this is hopeless. Okay, maybe I was just wrong. No problem.
Quickly,
Bummer.
just explain what that SCP is about, and then I'll just throw some questions I have related to that one.
Right. So,
Look at this pixel
this
art
is all
here.
like set in the 80s, and it has its own retro aesthetic for anyone who might be encouraged to go check this out. This entire series has a custom
I do like that aesthetic.
theme that's built off of a theme that someone else made, but the idea is it's got this like pixely retro aesthetic, and it's all set in like the 80s, and it's all sort of about computers
nostalgia.
and old retro technology.
Yep.
And so the Foundation is converting all of their old records for their SCP documents from like a vinyl format over to their electronic systems. And while they're going through all of these boxes of vinyl records and converting them in the basement of like one of their sites, they find this containment chamber that they knew nothing about, and they go in and check it out. It's this anomaly called SCP-5241, and there's this bubble around it, basically, where when you're within that bubble, you can talk to the anomaly, and when you leave that bubble, you can't remember anything about it. And no information about the anomaly, or very little information about the anomaly, can actually pass out of that bubble. So it's an anti-memetic effect, and I assume most of your listeners know what that is, but for those who don't, an anti-meme is like a meme, except instead of an idea making you want to spread it to other people, it's an idea that censors itself. It doesn't want to be communicated about. So something that has anti-memetic properties basically means it gives you localized amnesia. It makes you forget relevant information about it. And that can manifest in lots of different ways. And there are anti-memes in real life, like a really boring paragraph of text that you have to reread like 10 times to even know what it's saying. Like,
Sounds familiar. Too familiar.
which some people could say about some of the paragraphs in my work, but
You don't say.
anyways, I'll get to the point. The idea is it's like this cube that has some sort of AI inside of it, and they don't really know very much about the AI because every time they leave this like 3-meter bubble around it, they forget basically everything that they said to it, and they can't even see what the cube, the little like computer cube, actually looks like beyond the fact
We're at garden variety anti-meme here. Let's see where we go from here.
that it's just a cube. They can see like the wireframe edges of a cube, but no actual visual information about it can pass through the
I wonder if
sphere.
that's like a little, like a playful nod to the fact that 5.5 is not a sphere. So it's like the one thing they can kind of detect is like a, really the device's own, ontological framework is a square. Or a cube. I wonder if that's kind of like a shutout.
And so they're really confounded, and they start designing this AI named Memezyne. And the idea is that this AI named Memezyne is going to be specifically designed to be able to deal with anti-memetic information in a way that other AIs can't. And she's named Memezyne because Memezyne is the Greek goddess of memory.
Oh, good.
But yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
But yeah, so they're making this Memezyne AI to go inside of the cube and try and figure out what's going on in there and report back to them because she's going to be able to remember what happens. And while they're doing that, a group of people from this sect of the Church of the Broken God called the Maxwellists show up and try to steal the cube. So, refresher for anybody, I'm assuming you have zero knowledge of what's happening. So, Church of the Broken God is an anomalous religious group within the Foundation universe. The idea is that their god is...
See, this is another problem with like outer fandom interviewing inner fandom. That's really why he's doing this. Like, if this was a show, let's say between him and, I don't know, someone else on the Admonition director's board, because Admonition, if you look at the hub, it wants to be Netflix when it grows up. So on the board committee for Admonition, he wouldn't have to do this. He wouldn't have to dip down, slow the pace, slow the pace to grab and hold the hand of the audience. It's nice of him to do that, but I think it's anybody would have to, even me, I think, but. It's just a shame. Like, I'm looking for that product out there that it doesn't have to do that. That's like, okay, well, we're all on the same, minimum sort of prerequisite levels here.
Is a giant robot made up of a bunch of anomalous pieces of machinery that are imbued with his will.
Yeah.
He used to have a big say in what happens in the universe. He was broken apart and like gave his life to save the world or something tens of thousands of years ago. Now they want to reconstruct him and put him back together. This is the main story of DJ Cactus's and Twisted Gear's 001 proposal, The Broken God. And so the Church of the Broken God will implement themselves with like pieces of machinery and technology and things so that they can be closer to the image of their god.
So it's always funny to look at the comments of these things, because not only do you discover people's like, they have YouTube accounts obviously, but like here's a backhanded compliment from a potentially threatened author, Grigory Karpin. Very cool to see smaller creators on here. This was a year ago. Like, Place's new series is excellent. Yeah, so it's like it's very backhanded. Yeah, you little small fry. Look at you. You're very cute. You got a little interview here.
And they're directly prejudicial to the foundation.
Gregory
because the
Carpin is
foundation
saying that.
storing a bunch of anomalies that they say are
Who am I to
pieces of
talk?
their god's body. Okay. This
Okay.
group has two other
Moving
offshoot
on.
sects. One of them is
We're
the
still talking about it.
Orthodox Cogworky.
Son of a gun.
The Orthodox Cogwork group. The idea is they don't like anything.
This guy's
that's
like, please
more
make
modern
this more
technology.
entertaining.
They think
Please,
everything
my
has
audience
to be
is
like old,
is bleeding.
like tin
Bleeding.
automata and
Come on, their
things like
eyes
that.
is are
And so
glossing
they've got
over.
Lots of, like,
Let's go.
clockwork and ticking sounds and things that happen in the machinery that they append to themselves.
I don't think the stream is
and,
freezing up anymore.
They're like an orthodox group.
Mm.
And then
I
you've
had to
got the Maxwellists, which are a much more modern,
I had to
digital-oriented version of the traditional
stop
Earth
streaming
God.
on YouTube,
they call
so this is
their
only on
god
Twitch.
WAN, not the broken god. They call it WAN.
Maybe that'll do it.
Which also happens to stand for Wide Area Network, so it's kind of a pun. The idea is they don't think their god is physical. They think their god is the culmination of all consciousnesses being digitized and synthesized together into one grand consciousness, and that will simulate the mind of WAN. And so they are all about, like, they have their own individuality, but they simultaneously are all better together, and they all
I kind of want to skip this part, honestly.
bring everyone together into the one true, like, mind.
Everybody here understands this stuff very well.
And so, they implement
Let's see.
themselves with, like,
Okay.
a lot more modern technology. They put
Okay, go
like
on.
chips in
Come
the
on.
just because. Yeah. So the Maxwellists,
Come on.
most inside, they somehow get word of this 5241 anomaly.
Okay.
Like, the Foundation realizes that the containment chamber for the anomaly starts, like, vibrating at really weird oscillations. They don't really understand why, and then it stops. And then they're like, well, we don't know what that was. Turns out it was communicating with the Hexagon to send a bunch of Maxwellists to come and get it. So these Maxwellists break into the site, take down a bunch of people. One of them's, like, fully robotic, but they all have, like, different levels of robotic electronic parts attached to them. They kill a bunch of Foundation guards. They get to the cube, and then before they can just straight up take it, it, like, jumps into each of their brains, and they all start just, like, working in, like, way more sync and not even talking to each other, and just like a machine just going through the site. They had intended to get the cube and just run, but now they're doing something completely different. They're going up through the site. They're, like, dealing with way more people, moving up through the levels of the site, and then they, like, get up to the, like, control sort of room in the site, and the one member of the group that's, like, fully robotic, like, plugs a USB stick, like, into themselves and then into the mainframe of the site or whatever. And after, like, they sort of hold down the fort for a while against the Foundation who's trying to break in, while that, like, upload is happening. The upload finishes, the AI jumps to the internet, and all
my gosh, man.
Maxwellists.
Okay, I'm trying to hang in here so that, like, we can get to some actual, like, comment worthy stuff. My eyes are just completely glossing over trying to listen to this. Boy.
Just, like, immediately die, and they're found to be, like, brain dead, like, their consciousnesses were just gone. And the AI is gone, and they can't properly trace it because the AI has all of these anti-memetic properties. So the idea is digital entities and information.
Now, I'll say this. I really feel for this guy. I really do. And here's why. If no one was sitting over in the corner talking to this placeholder guy at a party, like, I would go do it. You know what I mean? Because I feel for him. He kind of feels like that guy at the skating rink party who, like, can't skate, and he's kind of like walking along the wall while everyone else is skating, because this guy's analytical skills are crippling. They're self-crippling. This guy has a bad case of analysis paralysis, which is where you just overanalyze everything in the assumption that it is being thorough and you're getting places, but it's once again a confusion between distance and displacement. If you look at something like Zeno's paradox, which I know Placeholder is familiar with, you can be perpetually expending motion and not technically get anywhere. That's really the analogy I use for the SCP Wiki staff. And we actually have a very good demonstration of this right now. If we go to 05, happening with this charter rewrite discussion. Here it is. These are the latest two in a very long procession of meaningless steps that enact a Zeno's paradox. And so that's kind of what he does. It would be much easier to just step forward, but instead there has to be, multiple voluminous pages worth of philosophizing and turning the ideas over at all angles and, whatever you want to do before you make the step. And so I think what I see, once again, part of this is that I see myself in this kid when I was a young lad. And I would tell myself a few things like this. I would say, that let's focus a little less on your own brain's physique, because your neurons are muscular, sure, but let's not use them to just flex in the mirror to ourselves. Let's actually try to do something with them. This kind of guy is at the level of thought and nuance, and thinking, and philosophy, I would say, to an extent, that he clearly is the only one in the room who can talk about these things, like for better or for worse. If this was a party, this dude, this is an appropriate screen cap I've caught. I think this screen cap, can you see this? Let me go to the stream so I can see. This screen cap really catches, I think, the essence of this podcast in the most curt fashion. If we were to strip down everything to its utter honesty, here's a guy gesticulating with his hands and fingers, all of them armed and in use and utilized. And then this guy is trying not to fall asleep. But then again, it's that much more impressive that this guy has a lot of commercial popularity with his articles. It's quite impressive.
Entities like an AI or like any other informational entity on the SCP Wiki has a unique pattern, digital footprint called an info signature, and normally you can track that info signature to figure out where the AI has gone.
God, dude. Okay. I'm about to fall asleep here. I'm about to fall asleep trying to listen to this guy tell me about his article. I mean, I'm the pot calling the kettle black, but I mean, you got to find a more charismatic way to talk about your own article. I mean, I'll talk about shit for hours like this. I do it every night. 7:30 p.m. CST. Except for tomorrow night, because tomorrow night is my anniversary, and we're going to be making pizza. Watching Better Call Saul. So hopefully that's a good one. But so I'll see you on... Oh, I won't see you until Friday. And Friday is our special cast on Friday night, 7:30 p.m., where we will review in detail, probably for 2 hours and 30 minutes or more, all of the articles that came out successfully on the SCP Wiki this week. We'll talk about them. We'll synopsize them so you can stay up to date with all the things that have come out. And of course, I won't be able to not give you my opinions. So join us on Friday. Thank you very, very much for attending. Feel free to make suggestions and recommendations as to what you would like to see. And once again, I really appreciate you for being here. And feel free to introduce yourself in the comments, and feel free to get some other people who might kind of be into this sort of thing in here, because the more people who are commenting on this is it's going to be a lot more exciting than just me up here. But I do appreciate every view. You don't understand how much it means to me. I really appreciate it. So thank you all very, very much, and I'm satisfied with it, honestly. So thank you. I'm just happy to talk about this kind of geeky stuff. Okay, so we will see you on Friday. I'm very excited about that. That's our second episode. Tune in. Until then, this is Lack of Lepers, aka SCPCRNP. Y'all take it easy.